With us now, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, Washington Post national political reporter Sabrina Rodriguez, and former Ohio Governor John Kasich, who is now an MSNBC political analyst. Julia, Tom Homan saying that 308 serious criminals were arrested in the last 24 hours. Are these the massive raids that have been announced?
Well, Jose, just to put that in context, I had my producer poll a given month in the last year. They looked at September of 2024. And look, over those days, the highest day that they arrested was about 242 migrants in a given day. So 308 does seem to be a surge. But is it the shock and awe that the Trump administration promised? It doesn't seem to have the details, at least, that we were expecting. We were expecting this to target major metropolitan areas. We don't know the when, we don't know the where or the who. We just know these numbers as they're rolling them out. So what it looks like, and we've reported that this was likely, is that ICE would continue to do their operations. They would surge more resources and do more operations in the very early days of the Trump administration, and they would talk about it. But it's important to realize those numbers aren't necessarily dramatically higher than what we saw in the previous administration. And it may be very hard for them to reach that goal of millions and millions in a year simply because they don't have the funding yet, Jose.
On the other hand, Julia, precisely the fact that we don't know when, where, and who is what the administration is looking for to have a surprise factor.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they definitely called off those plans in Chicago that we and others reported were going to start on Tuesday morning when those plans started to leak. They want the surprise. And of course, every law enforcement operation wants the surprise because they want to be able to arrest people who don't know they're coming. They don't want them to hide. They don't want them to be armed. That is obviously something a lot of law enforcement organizations would do. And then you have this memo that you're talking about from the Justice Department, where they're saying that it is illegal for anyone to impede an immigration officer, a state and local police officer, and that they are willing to look at potential prosecution if any of those state and local officers get in their way. It's important to remember sanctuary city police officers aren't ever standing in the way of ICE, barricading the door when they're trying to arrest an immigrant. What they aren't doing is they're not picking up the phone and calling ICE when they have an undocumented immigrant that they've encountered in their operations. So it's going to be interesting to see how this memo gets interpreted and how exactly these people could be referred for prosecution and based on what behavior.
Sabrina, I know you've been very focused on this reporting in the last couple of days. What reaction are you hearing from people you're speaking to?
Right now, there's sort of this question of uncertainty of how far is this going to go, how wide-reaching this is going to be from the Trump administration. You know, we saw Trump on the campaign trail really tout. This was the centerpiece of his campaign, talking about how he was going to execute this large deportation effort. But I think for a lot of people, there's still not a full understanding of what that entails, what that looks like. For some people, that definition means, oh, no, he's not actually going to deport all the millions of people that he said. He's really going to just focus on criminals. For some, it's, oh, criminals and people that are taking advantage of government assistance. And for others, it is this perception of, oh, no, he needs to get rid of everyone who is here undocumented, who crossed the border or came illegally. So I think in the days to come, really, it's going to see how this sinks in with the American public when they start to see really that imagery come out. But I think depending on who you voted for and where you stand politically, right now, it's sort of people are in their corners and sort of set in their beliefs of what this is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, Governor, it does indeed seem that there are political reactions to it, depending on the prism from which they're seeing it. And a recent New York Times poll found that 55% of Americans support deporting all immigrants in the U.S. illegally. How do you see this, Governor?
Well, I think Sabrina said it right. It depends what the images are, Jose. Look, I don't know any American or very few Americans who would say that if somebody is here illegally and they have a criminal record, they ought to be picked up and deported. I think there's great unanimity around that. But if all of a sudden we have, raids in churches or in schools, which is they're now saying they could possibly do, those kind of images, in my opinion, Jose, they will not stand up. It's about a pendulum. It is about the border. Frankly, I think the Democrats were too lax on that, and the Republicans are saying we're going to strengthen the border and we're going to deal with this problem, particularly with people who are criminals, and the pendulum's going to come back. But I also want to tell you that yesterday I was very affected by the sermon by I think she was a bishop in the church where Trump attended, and tried to remind him that, these people who are here, you look into their face, you see the face of God. And we need to be merciful, and we need to be just in the way we go about it. And so I think that if that pendulum gets swung from too lax to way too firm, and people being yanked out of certain places, I think the public will not like that, and I think that will be cause for activism. I think this could be an era of activism where people say from the bottom up, no, that is not fair, that is not just, that's not my country. But as Sabrina said, we don't know yet. It's too early, and so I don't want to prejudge it. We just have to see how this all rolls out, in my opinion, Jose.
Yeah, that was Bishop Buddy at the National Cathedral. Julie, I know you were able to get a firsthand look at one of the final deportation flights of the Biden administration. What did you learn?
Yeah, that's right. I think it was really important to be able to see that. I mean, I saw a plane that was being filled with over 100 people going back to Honduras, including some little children. Now, we don't know if these people crossed recently or if they had been there for a long time. It probably ran the gamut. But it's important to realize the Biden administration didn't talk about this as much, but they did do deportations. And often, as we mentioned, those numbers could be over 200 arrests in a given day. Here's what the field office director, Miguel Vergara, told me about these people who were boarding this plane here. This was last Friday in Harlingen, Texas.
What we're seeing here, this is the final journey. Every individual is getting in this plane, or that we boarded in the plane, had their day before an immigration judge. The case was heard. They had their due process. Every possible remedy that could have been applied, or it was exhausted. And it was determined by an immigration judge that they don't have a right to remain in the United States.
And the context there, Jose, is so important because he's talking about how long it takes to get to the process where they can arrest and deport them. Trump can do a lot with these executive orders, but these people are still given the right to due process. And so just because someone is arrested doesn't necessarily mean that they've exhausted all of their remedies and they'll automatically be deported. They could be detained for a long time. It's an expensive process, and we have over 8 million migrants who are not detained in this country. So it's a big challenge if they want to take this on and to try to have some kind of results on it.
And Julie, I mean, there are also more than 1 million people in the United States with deportation orders that have not left the country. That's also a different group because their case has been adjudicated.
That's right. That's right, Jose. And I often hear that being described as the low-hanging fruit. Those are the people they want to go after because they can remove them from the country more quickly. I've sat in those immigration courtrooms before. A judge will say you are ordered deported, but it doesn't look like they just get arrested and put on the plane after that. Most of the time they walk out. And if they're found to be in the United States in violation of that order, of course, that is a felony and they are then arrested and deported right away. But it just gets into why this is so complicated and why so many people scratch their heads about why people are living in this country illegally. The system is broken. There are more people than they can handle. Trump wants to tackle this. We'll see if the tactics he takes on resonate with the American people, as the governor was saying.
Yeah, I mean, Sabrina, you spoke with a Latino family in Arizona who support Donald Trump. What is their story and what do they say?
We just published this first part of a series that's looking at this family, the Ramirez family in Phoenix, Arizona. And this family, all four of them, they have 2 college-age sons, the 2 parents, both immigrants from Mexico that all voted for Donald Trump. And it was interesting to talk to them because you sort of hear them talking through what we're talking through right now, this uncertainty of what exactly it is that it's going to look like. They feel that, yes, the immigration has gotten out of hand, that the amount of people coming, across the border is too much, that, people need to be following the law. But at the same time, there's sort of this uncertainty. OK, well, I think he's going to focus on criminals. Oh, well, actually, there's a really good chance that he may get some of the good people as well. And that is unfortunate. And sort of them grappling with the reality of that it is very hard for Trump to, if you believe that Trump is only going to focus on criminals, that is also very difficult to just squarely do. And I think for this family, as a family of immigrants, as a very proudly Mexican family, we're seeing them grapple with their evolving feelings on immigration, their evolving feelings on being American. And I think for a lot of Latinos, that is something that people are going to be feeling and thinking about in the months to come as Trump, continues to refer to immigrants the way he does and actually gets to now execute on the plans he campaigned on.
You know, John, just in the next hour, the House is going to meet to take up the Laken-Riley Act, which passed the Senate yesterday, the bill named after a woman who was killed by an undocumented migrant. It would allow ICE to arrest and detain undocumented migrants charged with crimes. What does it mean for this to be possibly the first bill that President Trump will be signing?
Well, I mean, it's part of his big agenda. And, you know, he said, I don't think this was right, that immigration was a bigger issue. The border was a bigger issue than inflation. I mean, both of them were big issues. So it's one of his top things. What I will say in listening here is, Jose, you know, there are a lot of people that waited in line and they got in here properly, who are people who came in and went through the system. If you don't go through the system and you go to a judge and the judge says, no, you shouldn't be here because you came in illegally, that's a legitimate question. And you have 1 million people who were viewed that way. Well, I mean, what's fair is fair. At the same time, Jose, this bill that's going to pass or whatever, we need a complete immigration reform bill. None of this can be fixed just by a president putting something out around the border or with ICE or whatever. We need a comprehensive immigration reform bill because there are a number of business people in this country that want to see an effective guest worker program. They want to see, there are a number of business people. Look at the fight inside the Trump about the HB1 visas, you know. So we need to sort this out. And it would be a great opportunity for a president to bring both parties together to do that. I just hope the water is not so poisoned that it can't be done, because you and I both have followed this for a long time. That's a way to fix it.